What about the United Kingdom? Well, until about 10 days ago, I was actually just going to talk about the royal wedding tonight, because they all have something to smile about. I must confess I was mesmerized as I saw William and Kate in the open carriage go from the Abbey to Buckingham Palace. I held my breath, as did billions of people around the world. A moment of hope, a moment of pageantry, of beauty and history, the likes of which no other nation can arguably present and promote. A wonderful, wonderful day. Tragically, in the meantime, we've had the riots that have swept right across England, and I don't want to dwell too much on them. Whilst we were inspired by William and Kate, we were horrified by the scenes in London and in all the major cities in England. Britain faces a very, very painful period ahead. The coalition government of David Cameron and Nicholas Clegg have embarked upon the most draconian cuts in government spending in the post-war period. It is going to be a difficult period ahead for Britain. And then, of course, Japan was where this all began, did it not? What happened in the 80s in Japan? In the 80s, we had a property bubble, we had a banking bubble, we had a stock market bubble, and they all came tumbling and crashing down. In fact, from 1990 to the present time, the Japanese economy has hardly grown. In fact, real estate prices in Tokyo, from their peak in 1990 to their low in 2003, fell 75%. This is not Zimbabwe we're talking about. We're talking about an advanced, developed economy. And the stock market fell 80.2%, in fact, from December 31st, 1989 to May 2003. What's the unemployment rate in Japan? Now, I'd be really impressed if anyone gets this. John is probably going to provide you the most stunning bottle of expensive wine if you get this right. I suddenly got people interested in the back. What's the unemployment rate in Japan? Okay, all right, let's start again. I'm going to turn all the lights out in this room, and I'm going to provide you with this economics quiz. There is a nation, I think you probably guessed which one it is we're talking about by now, that hasn't grown for 2 years, that has suffered outright deflation for several years. That's rate of increase in prices declining. Deflation. The banking system imploded. The entire system was recapitalized and rescued. And the stock market fell by 80% and the real estate market fell by 75%. If I then asked you to solve the puzzle and provide me with what the unemployment rate of that nation is, anyone with any understanding of economics would have to say 30, 35, 40%. The unemployment rate in Japan, as we speak, is 4.6%. It's amazing. It's a miracle. I mean, in economic terms, it kind of doesn't make sense. So what we've seen in Japan is a society go through 2 decades of economic stagnation, outright deflation, the collapse of the banking system, real estate market, and the stock market, and yet they've come out of it with an unemployment rate of 4.6%. So perhaps they are the shining light for the rest of the submerging world. And go to Japan today, it's still a civil, harmonious, structured, happy society for all intents and purposes. Obviously, notwithstanding the tragic events around Fukushima in northern Japan. So perhaps some of these countries will just have to accept that they live a new reality of frugality, almost warlike conditions. Some would say that the United States of America defied the laws of economics for far too long, that consumerism and materialism was corrupting that society, and that they'll be better off if they live within their means. And that's what's been happening in Japan. So maybe it won't be so painful as some suggest. More latterly, of course, to Italy joined the submerging list. I must confess, this is the part of the presentation that I really enjoy the most, because I'm going to leave the submerging world behind. Because nothing I've said should be new to any of you. All of you know about what's happening in these nations. It's just that I coined the phrase submerging as a sign of frustration about how many in our industry we're still not accepting what I call the new reality. If a nation like the United States of America attempts to defy the laws of economics, the day of reckoning will eventuate. That's what's materialized in much of these nations. They simply have too much debt. And when individuals, corporations, or governments have too much debt, they have to pay down that debt, spend less, and save more. Basic common sense. This is not rocket science. People in my profession continually pretend that everything is quite normal in these countries. It is not. And this is part of the new reality. So with a great sigh of relief, we're going to abandon the submerging world and cross to the vibrancy of the emerging world, because each of us have been mesmerized, have we not, over the last decade or more. Each of us have been mesmerized by the urbanization, the motorization, and the industrialization of the world's most populous nation. In fact, it was a Frenchman who first identified the great potential of China, Napoleon Bonaparte, who in 1802 said, "China is a sleeping giant, long may it sleep, for when it awakes, it will shake the world." And indeed, each and every one of us have been shaken by the remarkable rise of the world's most populous nation. And obviously we will spend much of our time in China. But let's go now to India, the second most populous nation in the world, led by the most able and competent political leader. Certainly the best educated political leader alive today. Who am I speaking of? Correct. Who has 3 degrees in economics, and you thought I was boring with 2. His first from Punjab, his second from Oxford, and his doctorate from Cambridge. I believe Dr. Manmohan Singh is the intellectual godfather of the liberalization of modern India, being formerly the finance minister in the early 90s, who's largely credited with the liberalization of the Indian economy. I think he's the most competent and capable political leader alive today. Not too difficult, some might say. In November 2005, Dr. Manmohan Singh was standing alongside his counterpart from China, Premier Wen, and he made this declaration, and it is a declaration that I've made at every single speech of mine since November 2005. Every single speech. Together we shall reshape the world order. And Dr. Manmohan Singh's vision, which he first articulated in 2005, in my mind will no doubt be proven correct. What about Brazil? When I first started managing money in the City of London in the early 80s, Brazil was the laughing stock of the capital markets. No one would lend them $1 or even a cent. Why? Because Brazil, of course, was a serial defaulter, as were all the other nations, mainly in Latin America. And we fast forward from the early 80s to 2011, and the Brazilians are now the fiscal envy of Washington, Dublin, Madrid, London, and all the other submerging nations. Brazil has more available arable land than any other nation on earth. Brazil is the breadbasket of the world, the largest producer and exporter of a whole range of core and key foodstuffs and commodities. What a wonderful, wonderful thing. The most populous nation in South America, performing so well. It's an inspiration to the region and for all of us around the world, and we wish them well. So when I first came to Australia in 1997, I was absolutely amazed at how little debate, analysis, conversation, and comment there was on our nearest neighbour. We talk, of course, of Indonesia. Indeed, if you look at any Australian newspaper, you can test me if you wish, any Australian newspaper that I've glanced at over the last 14 years, the only comment usually in it is negative when it comes to Indonesia. The overwhelming consensus in Australia is that Indonesia is to be feared. It is, of course, the largest Muslim country in the world, with a population of 240 million people, the fourth most populous country in the world. I say to you tonight that I think Indonesia will be one of the best performing countries in the world over the next decade. It is my view that the great majority of the 240 million people in Indonesia actually do not share the spiritual and ideological persuasion of Jemaah Islamiyah and its spiritual leader Abu Bakr Bashir. I believe the great majority of the Indonesian population wish to pursue a more secular and liberal path. I believe that in the next decade, Indonesia will be one of the best performing economies in the world. They are now ratcheting up each month all-time record foreign direct investment flows. India is pouring vast amounts of money into Indonesia. We're seeing the emergence of a robust middle class. And as a commodity exporter, they're really coming onto the global stage. I think that's wonderful news for the majority of the Indonesian people. I think it's great news for the Asian region, for us here in Australia, and for the rest of the world. Now, I don't think anyone in this room has seen me speak before, other than John, Ian, I think, at the back. I have a very, very public and self-confessed love affair with Vietnam. And I go there every year, and I've been very privileged to speak there for many years now in Ho Chi Minh City.